Perfect. All right. Good morning, family. You're going, what is this guy up to now? You'll find out. All right? You'll find out. It is great to be with you. And today, if you want to go ahead and turn your Bibles to Esther, we're in our daily Bible reading. And that's where we've been at for this whole year. And now we've hit Esther. And very excited to be talking about Esther with you this morning. Now, over here we have this chair here. If you know one thing about chairs, it's interesting about chairs like this because they're not called danger chairs, are they? They're not called adventure chairs. It's interesting because usually when I show up in my house and I go into a chair like this, and by the way, this chair belonged to my great-grandfather, named, we call him Paw Paw, all right? I didn't get more southern than that. And so he used to sit in this chair, and I do from time to time. And when I sit in this chair, usually it's to veg out. I mean, I just want a break. And so I just go to a chair like this, and I kind of close myself off and isolate myself. And I want this to represent a particular way of life. But once again, this is not called a danger chair. It's called a lazy boy, not a risky boy, okay? And this is going to represent a way of life that is secure and that is safe and that is comfortable. Now, over here, you have another way of life. And the kayak represents more the adrenaline junkie kind of way of life. They are what psychologists call type T personalities. T standing for thrill seeking. They are people who are drawn to high risk. They love all the heart pumping, adrenaline pumping, blood pumping moments in life. And they want to live life on the edge and adventure. And it's interesting because what happens with these type of people is I want you to look at this side. And I think to myself, what side does God want me to operate in? Does He want me to operate over here? And I think it's fascinating because this would be called, I would say, this right here is called type T for trust. If I had to put Christianity in one word, I would use the word trust. Trusting in God, trusting in His ways. And over here, I would classify this as the type C world, and that is standing for comfort. And I look at myself and I go, which world do I tend to operate in? But God calls us to live a life of faith and a life completely in His hands. And you give Him control of your life and you do what He asks you to do, no matter what and how crazy it might seem. You do that. And listen, if you live a life of trust, it is going to be a life of adventure. And it's interesting, we throw ourselves out there. You may not go down a wild water rafting or kayaking trip. You may not bungee jump. But if you're called to this type T personality lifestyle, it will be a life of trust and a life of adventure. Every year, people get hurt in household. All types of household items, knives and such. But I would say the most dangerous item in our house is this item right here. It's not by what we do in the chair. It's by what we don't do when we're in these chairs. There are steps of faith that if we get too comfortable, we will never actually take. Adventures that we'll never embark on. Battles that we'll never fight. Races that will never be run. And I'm telling you, sometimes, and you know it's true because you've seen it in your own life, in other people's lives, sometimes we believers get comfortable and we want to live the life of comfort. We like to sing songs like, leaning on the everlasting arms, safe and secure from all alarms. It can be so easy to live a life of comfort in the spectrum of the type C world. And so this morning, we want to look at a story from Scripture that challenges us to get out of the chair. And one of the greatest gifts that God can give you is a swift kick in the pants. Today's story is about God giving someone that very gift. And so we discussed today the story of Esther. And we're going to start with the first character, and his is Xerxes. I'm going to use playing cards to kind of give you an idea for those who don't know the story very well. He is a king of diamonds. And Xerxes is incredibly unpredictable. I could go through stories of historical documents that tell us how volatile he was. He was lethal. But one day he decides, I want to throw a huge party to show off my splendor, my glory, my majesty. And so he at the end of the party is completely trashed. This party goes on for quite some time. If you look in Esther 1, starting in verse 10, it says this. On the seventh day, which actually is the 187th day of this party, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, which is an understatement, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him to bring before him Queen Vashti wearing her royal crown. Now, scholars believe that the king is wanting Vashti to wear only her crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. And he wants to show off all his trophies. And the one trophy he really wants to show off is his trophy wife, Queen Vashti, who will represent the Queen of Diamonds here. She is a woman of integrity and is not going to be treated like this. And the problem is no one says no to Xerxes. No one does that. He is humiliated. And so she is never to appear before him again. Instead of apologizing to her, he banishes her. And so Xerxes is single and he's ready to mingle now. And so his advisors come up with a game plan. They say, yeah, I got a great idea. How about we have a pageant, and whoever wins the pageant becomes your wife and becomes the queen of Persia? That sounds like an idea that a group of guys would come up with, doesn't it? I imagine they're like, you know what? Before the love of Persia, I will give my time to be a judge in this pageant because I love the country so much. And so they decide to throw this, which enters into the next character of our story. And this guy is the ace of spades. He's Mordecai. It says this in Esther 2:7. Mordecai has a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as her own daughter when her father and mother died. So here is Esther. Esther is the Queen of Hearts, and she is going to steal your heart by the time we're done today. Esther didn't have parents, and so her close relative raises her cousin Mordecai. Mordecai also happened to be an official in the government there in Persia. So 127 provinces, each of them has a woman represented from the province, is going to participate in this pageant. And Esther represents one of the provinces, and she just kind of moves her way up into the pageant because she just wins over people. And then she's going to present herself before King Xerxes. And before she does that, she undergoes 12 months of beauty treatments. 12 months. Guys, you think your wife takes forever to get ready. This is 12 months of extreme makeover. Chapter 2, verse 10. This is very important because it tells us that Esther did not reveal her nationality. She didn't reveal that she was Jewish. And as you probably know, after 12 months of beauty treatment, she goes before Xerxes, and Xerxes looks at her and he says, "You are the queen." And he's so excited about it, he throws a big old holiday party. He has no idea she's Jewish because Mordecai told her not to tell a soul. Chapter 2, there's a side story that happens with Mordecai. Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate, and he overhears 2 palace officials who are saying they want to kill Xerxes. He reports that to Esther. Esther sends it to the security team. Security team takes it, investigates it, and they say, he's right. They are trying to kill the king. And so they go and they take those 2 guys and they impale them. They write down Mordecai's name. And they put that into the king's annals so that someday he can be recognized and honored. Later on, King Xerxes needs some help. So he hires a guy named Haman. Haman is going to be the prime minister. He elevates Haman above all the officials. And for Haman, we're going to use this card right here. It is the Joker. And it's not because the guy's funny. It's because he ridicules the Jewish people and their belief in God. So King Xerxes appoints Haman to be the prime minister above all the land and the chief advisor to the king. And it's often true that when people are raised up in high positions, we get to really find out what they're made of, don't we? This guy is addicted to power. And he's also very much in love with himself. the king and himself demand that everybody who walked by and they see Haman, they were supposed to bow down to him, kneel down to this guy. And that's the type of ego trip he's on, man. He craves this. And because of fear and his position, everybody bows down to Haman, except for one guy. And that guy is Mordecai. Mordecai, the Jew, will not bow down to Haman because they believe that you only bow down to the one true God, not to a man. And this infuriates Haman. This infuriates him. And to get back at Mordecai, Haman sets up a plan to kill Mordecai, but he goes well beyond that. Look at Esther 3:6. It says this, "Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, the Jews, Haman scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Haman was a Hitler. He was a bona fide racist. His hatred for Mordecai and his people compels him to devise this plan. And he goes to Xerxes. He says, Xerxes, I got a lot of money, and I will throw all this money into the king's treasury. But here's the deal. There's a group of people here that do not fit in. They do not belong. And we need to wipe them out. We just need to wipe them out. King Xerxes says, if that's what you think we ought to do, let's do it. You can just keep your money. And so all of a sudden he comes up with an idea to kill all the Jews. And he basically comes up with extermination day for all the Jews. He gets the king to put his ring on it, signet ring, which says, this is set in stone. This is going to happen. If you are a Jewish person hearing this, you've got to be thinking, God has abandoned us. You've got to be thinking that. And the answer to that is no. Though you don't see him, you are not out of God's sight. God continues to care. And just like in this story, when things turn in our life for the worse, oftentimes we do not need to conclude that God has abandoned us. Don't conclude that God is absent. God says over and over in Scriptures, places like Hebrews, that He'll never, never leave you, never will forsake you. But this looks incredibly bleak for the Jews. And then Esther 3:13 and 15, it says this. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to, read with me, destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews. If he could kill them 3 times, he would. Young and old, women and children on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. Mordecai hears about this plot and he goes into mourning. Esther hears about it. She goes, what's up, Mordecai? And Mordecai says, you need to step up and you need to advocate for our people to the king. And she says, Mordecai, it's not that simple. You don't understand. The king has not summoned me into his presence for 30 days. It's been a month since I've seen my husband's face. And if I go before him and he does not extend the royal scepter to me, I could die. Mordecai, remember the last time a queen breached protocol and didn't show proper respect? I love how Mordecai responds to this. He says this in Esther 4:13 and 15. He says this, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the people, of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, read with me, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. For such a time as this. For such a time as this. Mordecai says to his young cousin, perhaps this is why you have risen from an orphan to the first lady. God has orchestrated all this to save his chosen people. And if you're labeling this part of the story, you would label this a tap on the shoulder. A tap on the shoulder. Esther is feeling all the pressure coming down on her as the plot is unfolding, but Mordecai will not allow her to wiggle out of it. He lays it out for her on the line. He says, now is the time. We need you. This is the moment. We've all been there. Every one of us has been tapped on the shoulder. You can read Ephesians 2:10. And I think to myself, we often think this way. A comedian said it this time. He said, I have 3 wonderful children and another child. And I remember hearing that going, that is terrible. But listen to this. God has no spare children. God does not make extra human beings that He is not planning on using. God does not make bench warmers. You have a call. You have a mission. You have been tapped on the shoulder. Every one of us has been called to be ambassadors for Christ. Every one of us has been called to be disciples and to make disciples. And every one of us is called to serve the hurting, the last, the least, and the lost. Listen, if you've already been tapped on the shoulder, you shouldn't be waiting around for an assignment. You already have one. And here's one principle that I believe Christians should be living by, and that is you go until you get a no. You go until you get a no. Say that with me on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Go until you get a no. You need to already be serving, not waiting to be told. I have yet to hear this at Canyon. I pray to God I don't. I've had people come up to me and say, I'm waiting to be asked. I'm like, what? Are you 3 years old? How old are you? 45. You're 45 years old and you're waiting to be asked? I'm telling you what, there are opportunities all over the place. I don't need anybody to tell me to do something. God puts it on my heart, and there's possibilities all over the place. There's teenagers that need to be mentored. There's nursery that needs to be stocked. Children need to have people in their life. We got LTC coming up. We got children in this community that need to be mentored by. You don't need for an elder to go, hey, we need you to do this. God put the Holy Spirit in you, and you in your own discipleship, by hearing God prompting you, should be heading in that direction. You go until you get a no. There are people who are homeless all over the place. There are coworkers that need you to share Jesus with them. You do not need a minister to tell you to do that. There's people right there in your neighborhood need to hear about Jesus. And Mordecai is telling Esther, it is no accident that you are in the position you are in at this time. Just like God is telling us. There's no accident. You are where you're at right here, right now. You're there, Esther, to use your influence to intercede on the behalf of God's people. You have not been brought to the palace to accumulate great wardrobes and wonderful jewelry and exotic perfumes. You have not been brought to this point so you can be the most attractive person or woman in Persia. Esther, you've been brought to this point by God to sustain the Jewish people so that one day Jesus Christ can come out of the Jewish people and bless the whole world. So Esther thinks about it. Do I want to live the lazy boy life? Or do I want to live the life of type T personality, a life of trust? And every time we shake our head and say no to the calling, it is easier to shake our head to the next calling that God sends us, and our gifts go uncultivated. And that day will turn into another day, and that day will turn into weeks, and weeks will turn into years. And then one day you will look back and you will see the incredible moments that God had called you to, the adventures from God that you took, you could have taken, but you never did actually take. Great bold prayers that you never prayed, sacrifices that you never made, lives that were never touched. And you'll be sitting in your recliner and suddenly it'll hit you that there's a hurting world out there desperate for this great God who is calling you to something bigger than yourself. But you didn't go because when you were tapped on the shoulder, you shook your head and you said no. You were too comfortable, and God doesn't want that for you. That's why one of the greatest gifts He can give you is a swift kick in the pants. Sometimes God comforts the afflicted, but listen to this, church. Sometimes He afflicts the comfortable. Sometimes God afflicts the comfortable. And the comfortable are those of us who want to live and choose to live the lazy boy life pathway. Look at Moses. Look at Gideon. Look at Peter. All of a sudden, God gave them a swift kick in the pants. He said, go do this. And that's what this sermon is a trumpet call saying, go do something for God. Don't wait. Don't wait till you've heard more or learned more. Go today. Go right now. And Esther knows what she can't do this in the flesh. And so she does something very incredible. She asks her cousin to do this for her. She knows this is too big, so here's what she tells him to do. Go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my servants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. This isn't about, and I'm going to lose a friendship. This isn't, I might lose my job. This is life or death. Several years ago, a guy at Mattel, which is a toy company, made a mistake. And what he ended up doing was, our G.I. Joes and Barbies and that kind of thing. He ended up putting the voice boxes that were supposed to go in Barbie, he put them into G.I. Joes. And some of the voice boxes supposed to go in G.I. Joes, he put into Barbie. And so all of a sudden, these little boys are opening up their gifts, and they're opening up their G.I. Joes, and they're surprised to hear their G.I. Joes say, let's shop till we drop. And little girls all over the place are opening up their Barbies, and they're shocked to hear Barbie say, hit the ground now, hit the ground. Now, I love this part because Xerxes thinks he married Barbie. But really, he married a G.I. Joe. Not only is she beautiful on the inside and a pretty face on the outside, but she is fiercely courageous on the inside. She's a soldier. And she steps right up to the front lines, right into danger. And God taps her on the shoulder and she says yes. That's the kind of people that God wants to send out of Canyon. The people that say yes and want to live this life and not this life. And she says, please pray for me. And I tell you what, I love the fact that she says, I need others to pray and fast for me. Because I think to myself, how many of us, when the pressure comes down on us, how many of us ask for prayers and fasting? Very few of us will do this. What we'll do, we'll get mad, we'll withdraw, we'll work harder. God says, cast all your anxieties upon me because I care for you. And we would be wise to fast and pray just like Esther did. And after she does that, she goes to the king uninvited. And she's right there in front of the king. This is the moment. Their eyes meet. Her heart is pounding. This is the scariest moment in her life. And although she was uninvited, it says that the king was pleased with her. And he extends the royal scepter towards her. And he basically says, you can have half the kingdom. What do you want? And we notice that God is working upstream here. And she says this, I want you and Haman at a banquet. And the king says, done. They have a banquet and she says, I want to have another banquet. And Haman goes home from that first banquet. And he can't enjoy the banquet because he is so obsessed with Mordecai. He tells his wife, I can't wait till extermination day. He needs to be dead right now. And so what they do is they have the servants build a 75-foot pole in his yard so they can impale Haman on it. But that very night, God is working. He's unfolding his plan. And he does it through insomnia. The king can't sleep. And so he goes in, he asks the officials, he says, you guys read me the meeting notes? Can you read me all the notes in the king's annals? And you go, why would he do that? You ever heard notes read? You put that in a sermon together, it'll knock you out. And he is reading the notes, and the guy's reading the notes to the king, and all of a sudden the king wakes up because he hears about the guy the two people who tried to kill him. And he's like, I remember that. Now he's not sleeping, he's awake. He's like, who fouled up that plot? And the official said, Mordecai did. Well, what did we do for Mordecai? We did nothing. Well, we're going to do something. And so the king wants Haman to see him. Now, Haman wants to see the king because Haman wants to talk about killing Mordecai. But before Haman can say that. The king says, hey, come in my office. I need to talk to you, Haman. And then here's the question that Xerxes brings up to Haman. He says, what should be done for the one that the king wants to honor? Haman thinks he's asking that question because he thinks he wants to honor Haman. And Haman puts on his best humble face and he says, well, if I was in your shoes, I would have a guy wear a robe that the king wore. And I would have him on the king's horse. And I would have a servant go on that horse with a guy wearing the robe all through Susa. And I would have the servant yelling at the top of his lungs, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. And the king hears Haman bring up those requests, and he looks at Haman. He says, that's a great idea. I want you to do that right now and go find Mordecai the Jew and do that to him. And instead of killing Mordecai, now Haman has to honor Mordecai, yelling this all through the city. And after he gets done doing that, he goes home and he talks to his wife and he says, this is what's happened today. And his wife looks at him and says, you're messed up now. And before she can get those words out of her mouth, the king's officials come in and they take Haman out to that second banquet. And this is incredible because God has orchestrated all of this. Everything is set up. And then the king with Haman there asks the queen, what's your request? And this is the moment when this woman steps up to the plate and hits a home run. In Esther 7, it says this. If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold, read with me, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. The exact same words that Haman used earlier, she uses to the king. And if we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing. Esther said, an adversary, an enemy. I could just see her pointing at him. The vile Haman. And then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine. I think it's funny that the commentator has to mention that. Left his wine and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. The king walks out. He's so upset. He goes back in to gather himself. Now Haman knows that the only person who can save him is the queen herself. And he goes towards her to beg her for his life. And he goes towards her and he probably trips over a Persian rug. That's funny, by the way. And he lands on top of Queen Esther just when Xerxes enters the room. And the king says this. He says, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? I mean, talking about things going from bad to worse. And eventually what happens, immediately they put a cover over Haman's head, which says, this guy is dead. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall for this part. Because there's an official who is watching all this transpire. And he's watching this and he interrupts and he says, King, I'm sorry to interrupt all this going on, but I happen to be walking past Haman's house. And I saw a 75-foot pole. And he wanted to kill Mordecai on it. You know, Mordecai, the guy who saved your life. Yeah, he wanted to kill him. And that pole is just sitting there, you know, unused. It's just a shame. You know, a pity. It's just sitting there. And Xerxes' anger burns and he says this, impale him on it. Can you say poetic justice? Unbelievable turn of events. Unbelievable unless you know the author of the story. 3 observations in 2 minutes. One is this. Look for opportunities. Mordecai looked for them. Esther looked for them. They are all around you. Talk about promptings from God. They're all around you. I'm on my way to the airport this past week, and I go, man, I got so much work to do, Rachel. I hope God will allow. I hope I can get stuff done on the plane. And she looks at me. She says, you know that's not going to happen. And I said, what do you mean? And she says, because God's going to put you next to somebody that you need to minister to. And I said, man, I don't know about you, but God's always prompting me, and I don't want that. They're all over the place. And so I go to the plane, I'm sitting down, and I notice one thing about this plane. There's a whole bunch of 30-year-old women all over the place. And I'll tell you right now, that scared the daylights out of me, because I'm going, what's going on? And all of a sudden, I see one guy. I was one of the last ones on the plane. I see one guy, and he's got a seat next to him, and I'm like, I'm sitting next to him. I said, we can bond together and hold off all the other women around us. And so I sat next to him, and I'm getting my stuff ready. And then all of a sudden, I started the conversation up. I said, so you from Louisville? I'm flying to Louisville. He says, no, I'm from Phoenix. I said, really? You're from Phoenix? What are you going to Louisville for? And he said, I'm going to the D6 conference. That's the same conference I was going to. And I said, really? What church do you work with? And he says, I work with, I'm not going to say the church, but it's a Church of Christ local in town. And I thought, that's weird because this is not a Church of Christ conference. It was interesting because of all the things that were going on, all the people I could have sat next to, I sat next to him. And he really needed an ear. And he needed somebody to talk to. And he's a minister, and he's lonely, and he's hurting. And I'm a little bit further down the line, and so I could kind of help him. And I made a friend. On this trip, and I tell you what, the odds of us getting together are so unlikely, it is really amazing how God put us together. Pay attention to what God puts in your path, the people He brings in your life. Are you paying attention? Number 2 is this: invite God into the process. I love the fact that Esther chose to do this through fasting and prayer. She knows that she doesn't control events. She takes them to the one who can do something about this. Number 3, have the courage to speak up. Jesus says, whoever acknowledges me before others, I will acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. These 2 people were nobodies. This was an orphan girl. I love how God specializes in taking what the world doesn't expect and bringing His glory out of it. And some of you may look at your life and feel so defeated. Here's my words for you. Do not accept defeat. Do not give up. God has not abandoned you. And I know how the story ends. And you know how the story ends. Haman gets put to death. Mordecai, the Jew, gets elevated as prime minister. And it's interesting because it seems so unbelievable. But what happens here is an ace. What he does, he challenges the queen to confront the king. And it's just unbelievable what God does. All this happened because the King of Kings works upstream and providentially worked His plan without having His name mentioned in the entire book. God's name is not mentioned in this book. But God screams out in every single verse in this story. Amen? And so when you think that the deck is stacked against you, let God play His hand. It says in Esther 8:16, for the Jews it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. And I know when Esther witnessed the celebration that she relished what many of us experience, that there is no greater joy than being used by God to make a difference. There really isn't. There is no greater joy than being used by God to make a difference. And maybe today you need prayers. Maybe right now you were stuck between, I am living this life right here, but I need to live this life. And I would challenge you to leave the recliner and head to a life of trust in God. And there's great adventure there, and something might be holding you back. We would love to pray with you in the back. You can come up here. I would love to pray with you. But maybe today also you want to do the biggest thing and you could do for trust, and that is give your life over to Jesus Christ through baptism. We would love to do that. Maybe you want to share a joy about going until you got to know. I would challenge you that take a stand, do what you can, pray to God just like Esther did. She said, I need prayers. There's people over here who need prayers. Won't you grab a card? Won't you come as we stand and sing?